Well, thank you everybody coming. I trust that we all know the authors on this paper. They are really the spatial and temporal big data or analytics titans in our disciplines. Phil Young is really a long-term researchers in this area, and he has so many very well-received, highly cited publications on spatial and temporal research. And he also have a school of PhD students across the US and in China. It's really very influential for his scholarship and his teaching in GIS on this particular topical area. And Vince, I don't think we need to have more introduction as well. He has always a big figure in GIS, spatial temporal analysis, started with Microsoft. Now he has his own company and really doing some cutting edge research in this field, but different from academic. He actually do something useful and practical, really promote the thinking and applications in this area. So we're really looking forward to your talk, and hopefully we will have a very engaging discussion on this topic, and then looking at further collaborations between our readers and authors at International Journal of Geographic Information Science. So unfortunately, Professor Sashi Shekhar, he doesn't feel well and he could not come to the webinar. We wish him the best to recover. We will have Vince to get started, as you can see his title on the screen. And then we will have Phil give us another presentation. Then we will open the floor for discussion, and I look forward to everybody's input. So Vince, please take over the floor.
All right, and thanks, May, and thank you, and for the audience. And I think it's still early morning in the central United States, and now it's actually late in Shanghai right now. Also, thanks, Phil, for organizing this webinar and also the special issue for spatial temporal AI. I'm very delighted to share some of my thoughts and some of the results that we've been doing at Waze.ai in the using of spatial AI for digital cities. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce briefly about myself. And I've been doing the research in the field for years, and primarily I've been working with York University as a chair professor in spatial computing. At the time, actually, we're building a 3D globe system for the internet, but that back to almost 15 years ago. After that, I joined Microsoft, and I'd be lucky and I have a team, a very sizable team, to build the Microsoft vision called the Microsoft Virtual Earth. And the Microsoft Virtual at this time was to build something now we call the digital twins. The purpose of the Microsoft Virtual Earth is to analyze and build a computational urban and cities. And we have built about 500 cities at the time, and in 3D models, as well as I've been collecting a bunch of data, a lot of urban data, and built into the Microsoft Virtual Earth. Of course, the business-wise, at the time, we tried to power the Microsoft Virtual Earth for a lot of business applications, especially marketing intelligence and the retail banks and so on and so forth. But that's almost 10 years ago. But now, and we understand the AI is coming, and it's all getting matured. So I started a new company in 2017 called Waze.ai. And we still share the very same vision, and we've been building and pursuing the last a decade. And I think all of the researchers and a business as well, and the governance as well, and really looking into how or why and where those human activities that can be modeled in some kind of computational way, and especially for those complex cities. And here's a picture of the city of Shanghai. And this is a life. Unfortunately, I could not show the life of the cities here. But so far, the cities has been equipped with about more than 1 million of sensors and around the cities. And of course, and people have equipment with the mobile phones. So now we're being able to collecting a huge amounts of the probes, the data, and on a very much daily basis, and use that for a lot of city activities. So the question being is, now getting the technology is mature, are we able to use the computational or AI to model the cities? And just like the vision that we shared before about building the virtual Earth. So here is actually what we thought, and we've been pursuing this in the last 5 years. So next, so what is the spatial temporal AI? What is a spatial temporal AI? So on your left-hand side is really the physical world, and the right-hand side is the digital world. And we've been pursuing this for years. The AI, the spatial temporal AI, is really the way to perform the digitization and more the decision intelligence of the physical world. So this chart, I think, is very simple and easily to be understood. And but if looking at the stages that we've been building, has been building this in a long time, and anywhere from digital forming of the data, by collecting dynamic data, by building big data, and as well as a knowledge graph. And at the end, we need to build AI engine to feedback our knowledge into the way we manage and control the physical world. So the next is actually just built a few months ago, and there's a World AI Conference held in Shanghai, and the Shanghai AI Association is very interesting and been defined 3 major AI applications. One is called AI for fintech, and one is AI for medical, and including a medical medicine as well, and also the spatial temporal AI for cities and for smart cities. And Michael Batty also was being invited for this conference as well, and he gave an awesome speech about spatial temporal AI and made a definition of the spatial temporal AI. But I believe that most of our audience understood this topic really well. The question is how actually being able to do it, and not just about talking, because it's really the complex issue. So next. This is the way that we've been practicing the last 4 years. I think this chart is very interesting. And for many of you aware that on your left-hand side is all physical elements that you've been collecting in the past, including the physical world, the virtual like maps, semantic data, events, POI, mobility information about human beings or movement or goods or logistics or so far. And we build like a GIS into many layers. And this is a digital representation of the world. We call the mapping. But in fact, and that's been the traditional technology that I've been using to use the GIS to do the lot of analytics. Now AI is coming. The way to organize the data is very different, and it's probably gonna be not that effective. I would say the effectiveness of organization data into those layers will not be very friendly to the machine intelligence. So the new ways of organizing the spatial data is something we call the spatial analogy graph. And we call the spatial temporal knowledge graph, called STKG. The KG is really the association of contextual data, behavior, and the relationship among all those elements, among all those layers, among all those attributions. So we've been able to use this not just about the one-dimensional, I would say the vertical organization of the layers into the two-dimensional association of many different elements. So this is a way to capture the dynamicness of the data, of the spatial data. So we've been studying a lot about the spatial temporal knowledge graph and use the spatial temporal graph for the future. Later on, I will expand that for our AI reasoning and inference and prediction. So this is a very important chart we've been practicing the last few years in terms of building the knowledge graph. Now going to give a few minutes about talking about what is the knowledge graph, and many of you being aware, and actually the data and the knowledge can be organized in many different ways. And the knowledge graph seems to me is so far probably the best way of associating all the spatial temporal elements. So all the way from left to right hand, you can see we can build constantly and again and layer by layer or a graph by graph about all these different relationships, and we call the node and the linkage. So you can build the nodes and build a linkage, and you build a graph, and you can build a graph of the graphs. And this is a way of building the knowledge graphs. Now, thanks to the AI, and the AI help us to analyze this very complex relationships. It's very tough to explain why we can be organized in such a way. But this is approach to really to extract the information from the we saw the structured wise to something the multiple dimensional. So by knowledge expansion accumulation, as the graph shows you, and you can see we can build this on your right hand side, this multi-layered graphs. And also you can see the graphs getting thicker, and the knowledge gets to be more, you will see some interesting fact after organizing the spatial temporal data in such approach. And we actually, because the city has been very complex, so we're actually using this approach to building our own prototype. Later on, we'll talk about some examples here. So next. So this is the knowledge graph, the way to construct the knowledge graph. And so at the bottom, I'm sorry, there's some Chinese there's some Chinese there. Hope you can tell. But the basic, you can see you from ST spatial temporal KG, from learning to construction and end to the service. This is a three stages to build the knowledge graph. Okay, next. So this shows you whole picture of how the way we organize the data is. It says non-trivial, and when you look at putting this one into the slide, you can see on your left-hand side is really you're talking about the people, place, and the names and all those spatial temporal items. But incrementally, we will build the knowledge graph. And the important part here is after building the knowledge graph, we've been able to use graph-based neural networks. And this is something called the GNN. I think a lot of researchers have seen they already started using the GNN to do a lot of work. So this is a way we build the knowledge graph and the GNN network for the future applications. So this is the knowledge graph, the way to construct the knowledge graph and the GNN. Here's the system we built, and at the bottom is data organization, and basically you have to fuse all different kind of data together. And thanks to the big data, so we don't have to structure data in any databases. So basically those data will be unstructured or structured, and as long as you've been able to fuse them together. The middle tier is really the knowledge graph, and it's a representation of all these entities, as well as the relationships we call the linkage. And so this is the unified knowledge representation. And the last the layer you can see is called unified search, AI recommendation, graph mining, event analysis, interactive BI, and temporal reasoning, link prediction, knowledge services. Those are some AI tools that we're using for building the next level of understanding of the data, for supporting a lot of a deep analysis and very complex analytic issues. So this is basically the knowledge graph that we've been building in our system. It's a Wade's spatiotemporal AI platform for smart city uses. And by constructing these tools, then we were able to do a lot of more things you probably never been able to imagine before. So the next. So now you see, and give you a couple examples. And this is we built for the city of Pudong. This is a very important district of Shanghai. And we built the economic knowledge graph. We built the planning graph for cities, and also we built a community knowledge graph for the cities. So those are some examples of the different the graph examples. Now in the system, the core of this GNN engine would offer those functions: prediction, classification, detection, and projections. And those are the different the AI tools that we can use, or the combination of them for the applications. So far we've been building this one for the last the several years. Initially, we tried the different the graph databases. And as you know, the graph database is still immature, but it's now getting more and more sophisticated. And so it's consumed a huge graph of the memory and the computing powers. And in our initial testing for building the city like a Pudong, it can cost us about millions of dollars, US dollars, to build this kind of a huge knowledge graph. But there's a lot of optimization work we've been doing to optimize and to build a more compact knowledge graph. So we're able to build at a reasonable cost to build the knowledge graph for the city of Pudong, Now I give you an example here to show how this the AI platform works. And this is industrial park. This is one very important the industrial park in Shanghai. It's a high-tech industrial park. So we try to analyze this industrial park by the knowledge graph we've been built. The knowledge graph has collected a lot of data, including the human mobility data, including the logistic data, including all the consumer information, enterprises information, the infrastructure information, and basically as many of the data have been able to collect it, and we fit into our ST knowledge graph. We did not do any analysis of them, but we do filter out many unnecessary data and any unnecessary data. So this example shows how actually we've been doing for this the planning, evaluation, and optimization for this industrial park. So next, we'll show you a video here. And this is a video. Let's maybe back to the video to the start. Can you back the video? Yeah, start it again. Okay. So we basically analyzed this industrial park in different dimensions. One you called innovation aspect, and competitiveness, impact ratio, and basically analyze this into different dimensions. Here we actually analyze the 5 dimensions of this industrial park. Here it actually shows you how the knowledge graph has been built. and we compare this industrial park to other the other one actually, which is located in Beijing, and that's very much matured industrial park in Beijing. Sorry, back to the previous slide. Yeah, yeah. Um, so we actually compare this industrial park in a very matured industrial park. We analyze the different the dimensions. So in this way, we're able to help to plan this new industrial park in different dimensions in terms of what we need to add into this industrial park, in terms we need to add more schools, whether we need to build more bus stops, whether we need to build more infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And also we analyze what kind of industry, what kind of a business we should introduce into this industrial park. Whether we should introduce, for example, the AI company, high-tech companies, or we should build more manufacturing companies into this industrial park. So it is a comprehensive analysis of industrial park by using the knowledge graph. And this is a really it's a very nice tool to do the planning, and also you'll be able to visualize it. And once you add more of schools, add more companies, add more commercial sites into this industrial park, you will see what will what kind of effectiveness or what will be the prediction that you actually can see from this tool. Okay, this is one example. Basically shows you we use knowledge graph for designing, planning, evaluation, and optimization of a new industrial park. This is a very nice example, and the entire process can be visualized using knowledge graph, as you have seen in this on the screen. Okay, next. Next one, let's choose the next application. Yeah, this application is a very traditional, we call the marketing intelligence. So basically that help the brands, help the retail, help the banks, and help them to do traditional marketing intelligence. But previously, most of the marketing intelligence was based on something LBS-based rules. Whether, for example, if you want to open a convenience shop, and generally people say, hey, we should allocate this convenience shop into somewhere close to the community and where they have a more population, blah, blah. But now it's more complex. We're actually using knowledge graph and AI to model this entire city, and we can find the best place, and even we can rank those convenience shops and project the sales, the revenue of each convenience shop. So this is a far more intelligent. And the way we are offering these tools, again, is based on the spatiotemporal knowledge graph by aggregating all kinds of information into this knowledge graph and using the knowledge graph to project and where you can see the best the performance of either the brand's retail marks or even outdoor advertising. And this tool has become very much standard in China right now and being adopted by most popular advertising or marketing agencies in China. They're using this tool to do the planning of their the marketing. For example, which district or which community should be the best for outdoor advertising dollars, and how much outdoor advertising should be placed for each community. And also we can project the sales and the revenue from this marketing campaign. So here actually shows you this, the screen actually shows you this video clips of the system. Actually, you can do, again, it's also you can do very dynamically, and you can show it, the whole process can be visualized as well. And this is not compared to the previous visualization tools. This is not traditional visualization tools. It is a way to basically help you to understand and interact with human operators about how this data on the knowledge graph can be used for the entire marketing process from start to the beginning, from the beginning to the end. And also, the data will give you the estimated results of your campaign. So this is a very nice example for the business. So apart from the business application and the city applications, and this is the one I really love to talk a little bit about it. It is really the award-winning application that we've been used in the last almost a year now. It is a nice example for using the spatiotemporal AI for compacting the COVID-19. And we offer this platform for Chinese, the CDC, the Center of Disease Control, and of China, and offer this. That's right off the. That was January 20th. I remember that was last year, January 20th, when the COVID-19 was identified in the city of Wuhan, China. And we spent about 3 months on building the systems and offering the system to the Chinese CDC and help them to predict the risk level of the disease around the country. And we've been able to identify about 800,000 the communities, and we basically labeled the risk level from 1 to 100, risk levels, and adjust on the daily basis for label each community, and that's helped a lot for the central government to combat the COVID-19. And finally, we actually received the award from the Ministry of Chinese Industrial and the Science So this being one of 12 companies being awarded by the Ministry of Industrial and the Science of China, and mainly because our contribution to combat the COVID-19. So this is again, I think you can see the power of spatiotemporal AI. Now it's being not just about at the research side and also at on the application side. So we can see not just about the talking, I think, and also you can see that's the business is derived from the spatiotemporal AI. So for more information, and you are very welcome to reach me and reach our company. And we continue to derive this more applications from the spatial temporal AI. But finally, I would like to say that this is non-trivial, and still there's a lot of work to do. Again, even for all these applications, we're still at a very early stage. But I do believe and trust that spatiotemporal AI can perform a lot more the applications than we imagine. So the AI is really not just coming, but will be really waived in many our research and in many of our applications. And all right, without that, I'd like to thank you very much and thank you for attention. Back to Phil and May. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you, Vincent. That was a great talk. I have a lot of questions. I believe the audience will have a lot of questions later. But let's move on to Professor Yang, Phil Yang. So he will give us another short presentation on his recent research related to spatial temporal big data analytics. Then we will open the floor for questions. So Phil, please take over the floor.
Yeah, thank you, May. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks to Vincent for the great talk. In fact, Vincent has been the pioneer in both the academia and also in the industry. What he presented is the solution, as I mentioned at the end. It was award-winning solutions to many global and national challenges like the COVID-19. For us, staying at the universities, we are looking at the problems more from a research perspective. So what I will talk is briefly, just very quickly, to see how the spatial temporal big data analytics have been used to address global challenges, and what are the research directions or problems we still have to address in the near future. And I will use 3 examples and then use one slide to summarize what do we mean by this as an innovative research frontier in terms of, in the context of GI science and geography overall. So the first example is about urban heat island or the global warming. We know this year in the summer, we had historically high temperature in the west of the United States. That caused a lot of trouble. If you look at the figures, in fact, every year the urban heat island or the global warming temperature rising caused hundreds to thousands of deaths. If you combine that to the air quality and other related disasters, there's millions of people lost their lives yearly around the world because of this. So how to deal with that is really a global challenge. In the past, we did a lot of research. The solution is really on both ends. From the global level, we need to look at the international policies, but specifically to us individually, we need to really look at the building level or the personal level. And that's what we saw from Vincent's presentation on how to track, for example, the COVID-19 and how to analyze the industrial park using the specific fine resolution data sets. And obviously, one of the things we have been working on is AI and how that contributing to spatial temporal study. This one, I just briefly mentioned, this is a transfer learning capability that we developed, which could predict the temperature at one city by using the training model from another city. For example, in this case, we're trying to use the model trained in Los Angeles, New York City, Atlanta, and Chicago, and to predict the Chicago scenario. You can see that the AI plays a big role here. In fact, if we come back to see how this may impact the future of the global citizens, we know that the climate is changing. In the past, about centuries or millions of years, the air quality has been very stable, but since about 60 years ago, we had a big bump of this AOD or the carbon dioxide, which increased the air quality problem. And so this is really a challenging issues that we're dealing with today. And we have to pull together almost all the spatial temporal data sets we have on the environment, including from the satellite observations. For example, this one shows that the PM2.5 related retrieval from the satellite observations. But if you pay close attention to this animation, you can see that a lot of satellite data sets has missing data sets. So how are we going to deal with that because of the cloud, because of the instruments, because of the temporal resolution? For example, most satellite observations, we have daily data, but for air quality and temperature, we really need hourly or minute level data sets. So how to meet that spatial temporal data challenge is a big problem. And also, once we have those observations, when we get the original signals from those different observations, they're in bands, for example, or spectral information. So which spectral information or bands should we take to predict the PM 2.5 out of, in this case, about 2,000 channels to get the principal components that could help us accurately predict or detect the PM 2.5 or air quality information, so that we could get down from the global level to really to the street level that can be used for decision making to save lives and prevent public health problems for the air quality induced, for example, asthma and other problems. Especially in the past year, because of the wildfire, the air quality changes a lot. This changes almost on a minute level. When we look at the readings from, for example, the pepper air or the air law sensors, they're changing almost every minute. So we need to capture until that kind of fine granular temporal resolution. And in terms of the spatial, we need to get really to the street level. So how to go from there? And on the global level, again, we have the satellite observations, and we can use AI to retrieve the parameter that we need to consider, but also be able to outreach to the decision makers. We need to collaborate with a lot of different people. But one thing I want to highlight is when we go from the observations to the information we need what we call the downscaling or spatial temporal data interpretation. In this case, we have in GIS, for example, the spatial temporal critiquing. But on the other side, we also have the new geo AI or machine learning or deep learning, or what Vincent termed as spatial temporal intelligence that could help us learn from the data sets we created or observed, and to be able to predict the data sets we are missing so that we can have a better understanding of the environmental situations to help with decision making. Another example I want to give is COVID-19 pandemic. And spatial temporal data sets plays a critical role in fighting the pandemic. We know that in the United States, last year, early spring, we had the first wave, and then last summer, we had the second wave. Last winter, we had the third wave. And when we get to the summer of 2021, we think we're good. Everything is fine. We have the vaccine come out. But if you look at this, after the summer start until now, in the summer, we had probably a good situation. But at the end of the summer and until now, the case numbers that coming back almost to the same level as we had the peak last year. So what's wrong over there? There's a lot of questions to be answered. For example, how the pandemic has been impacting the economy, and how could we control the spreading of the virus? There are many different methods. And what are the impact does it have on the environment, and how does it impact the mental health of citizens? Kaiser had a survey that 50% US adults has some kind of mental health because of the lockdown, stay at home, and that increased from about 20 to about 50. That's a big increase. And also, how can we safely reopen the schools? These are all very challenging and real problems that we have to deal with. And big spatial temporal data sets is the drive to find the solutions. For example, to understand the economy impact, we have to collect the data sets. This is just showing the data sets for 4 exemplar states in the United States to see how the confirmed cases of COVID and that impact to the stringency and also the economy. And another part is how to control the spreading. We know the 2 best ways. First is to implement the policies, lockdown at home. That's exactly what many countries implemented at the beginning of the pandemic. And then at the end of last year, we had the vaccine come out. So between these 2, how could we control the spreading of the virus in terms of the confirmed cases and the death case growth? And we did a lot of study using the spatial temporal data sets we collected, and also the spatial temporal analysis and mining. For example, this one tells that based on the policies that has been implemented by every state, how the virus has been controlled in terms of spreading in comparison between with and without the policies in place. For the spatial-temporal analysis-based counterfactual analysis, we see that the policy has been playing a big role and has been able to help with controlling the spreading. But we do have big problems about. So the vaccine came out last year. In fact, right before we had the vaccine administered about 3 weeks ago, based on our study, that is already helping us reducing the case numbers. And this really helped us control the spreading, but also on the other side, this also impact the health of the mental side and the positive sentiment among different, for example, races in the United States. We do a lot of study on that. And also based on different phases of the vaccination, so how people's sentiment or positive sentiment has been increased or decreased during this different time period. And also what's their opinion about the different vaccines. For example, on the right side, you see 3 figures. In fact, people are more in favor of the Pfizer vaccine, as you see from these 3 figures. In the middle, it's Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, because they came out later in the game, and there are some problems at the early stage, the blood clot. So the sentiment is not so high in terms of the positive engagement than the Pfizer and Moderna. So these are, in fact, effective controls. But another aspect, as a geospatial scientist, we always want to ask, what is the impact of COVID-19 to the environment? So we did a brief study about this to divide the entire world into different categories of air pollution and try to understand how the lockdown policies has been impacting this. And it's not a mystery. We found that the most impacted is where we have the most pollutions. And especially as we see from the East and Central, the United States and European countries, India and China. And the detailed impact to that we observed, for example, pulling other spatial temporal big data sets, like the carbon dioxide emission, fossil fuel consumption, international travel, and the tourists, and also the urban population, and the HDI and the per capita GDP. So we looked at all these, found that it's more developed places, more polluted. The impact is, in fact, more over there. And that's a good impact in terms of the air quality in that case is increasing because of the lockdown. Another part is that we want to look at the reopening of the schools. For example, in the United States, we have almost all the schools reopened now, with many people vaccinated. But if you look at the close case numbers, we still have a lot of states and schools. There are some opposition to the vaccination. So there's big problems among those places. And how to safely reopen that? We conducted a study using the campus setting as an example. So in this case, we take the spatial temporal location of every person on campus or across the school system and to observe their potential contact, especially without social distancing. For example, in the classroom, in the meetings, or without wearing mask. And by switching different policies to see how that may impact the confirmed cases. So based on the spatial temporal simulation, we would be able to correlate the policy put in place and how that impact outcome. This is the study using the GMU case. We found that the spatial temporal simulation could well predict what could be the confirmed cases in terms of the black line, as you see here, and the green line, which is the lowest number, and the red line is the highest number. So you can see that the black line is in between the red and the green line, which means have a good match after we implemented different policies. So this has been used, and we're expanding this to school systems to help with the K through 12 school system reopen, and also to control the spreading of the virus. So in order to enable that, in fact, the key of this is the big spatial temporal data approach that we mentioned. Before we write the paper, we didn't expect we're going to have the pandemic, but the big spatial temporal data approach did play a huge role, help us answer those challenging questions. And another example is about hurricane and flooding. We know Hurricane Eta came in, and they left tens of people lost their lives in the northeast of the United States. Normally, we do not have life losses in the northeast. So this, in fact, is a big problem, and we have to deal with historically. We have a lot of hurricanes, and the frequency is increasing according to lava. And when the hurricane come in, we have big problems. For example, the entire community is wiped out as almost. So how to deal with this kind of problem? And we picked the Miami-Dade County to look at this, because the reason for this is probably the hotspot in the whole United States in terms of hurricanes. Every year we have a lot passing that region. So we're looking at the inundation and evacuation, and how that may impact the COVID spreading when we have people go to the shelters. And there's going to be a lot of people over there, how to manage that part. Another part is that when we have the hurricane moving and passing by, we're going to have outage of power, water, and other problems. So how to identify those problems in real time and to dispatch the maintenance team in real time. And we need the spatial temporal data sets and also spatial temporal analytics and model simulations to help us address those challenges. So overall, if you look at the architecture, and we are trying to take the big spatial temporal data sets and pipe through the spatial temporal data management, analysis, mining, simulation, and eventually to produce some information that can be used for supporting or better inform the decision making. And in terms of what we still need is that we really need more spatial temporal data sets, although we already have a lot, which means we need a new observation system, which could be including the satellite, the in situ, the human sensing, and many other sensing technologies, and how to integrate those data sets to conduct smart spatial temporal data management analysis. For example, as Vincent mentioned, we need to make the spatial temporal data management intelligent. That's the spatial temporal intelligence coming. And also, we need to provide powerful near real-time computing framework that could pull these data sets together and process the spatial temporal data sets in real time, so that we could integrate the knowledge from different domains based on the spatial temporal principles or the patterns we mined, and then to work with the decision makers, either citizens or policy makers, to produce better societal impact. And that's pretty much I have to say. May, back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. That's a great talk. It covered a lot of grounds, and it's just fascinating. We now open the floor for questions. Then, audience, and feel free to either just jump in or raise your hands, and I will call your name. And I think let's give people some time to think about it. And let me start with one out question, the easy one.
是谁啊？店长的，这下面是中国人是谁？
不知道，应该是一个搞大数据的吧？
就这仨人。
Excuse me, somebody. speaking in
I
the
think so,
background?
IJGIS 的主
someone
编，
was talking and
请
they
看的主
didn't
编。
mute. Yeah.
Yes. All right.
刚才下那个是什么东西？
Let's see. Can I find
我
out
好
who
像
is talking?
我听音没。
I'm going to mute people. I
Yeah, you
apologize.
mute all. You probably should mute all. Yeah.
Okay. So we know that spatial temporal is providing a great common framework for AI, for cities, and for environmental problems or larger solutions like what you guys have presented. But it's not clear that it's any new way to think about space and time, or just like a space-time queue, like in Phil's presentation, like in knowledge graph, how Vincent, you incorporate space and time in the knowledge graph in what area, or in, I guess that each node in your knowledge graph has a spatial and temporal component, but is it represented as a space-time cube, like in Phil's presentation, or is more efficient or more complicated than that?
Yeah, Vincent, you are muted.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Hey, all right. So May, I think that's the two questions, right? And Phil, you want to start first?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
I think it's yeah, you
All
have
right,
a much better
I think
example
it's,
there.
yeah, it's a very good question. And the first, I think now we talk about intelligence, and we've actually find out the temporal will be probably more important than the spatial in some sense. And we've been dealing with spatial data for a long time, but we find out, and without the time and the spatial analysis will not be that effective in terms of dynamic phenomena that we try to deal with. So the temporal is actually very critical, and we've been talking about that a lot, but how to model that temporal is very, very key for anything, and prediction, projection, and the classification, and the temporal is very, very important. That's we actually we find out. So now we've been able to collect a lot of dynamic data these days with probes, with IoT devices, with mobile phones, with vehicles. So temporal, that dimension gets more and more, I think, important now, and people do pay more attention to that dynamic the elements. The secondly, I think, in terms of the building the knowledge graph, and as May ask about, so in our sense is spatial and temporal are only used as index. So we're not just dealing with spatial temporal data. Actually, we're dealing with all kinds of data with the spatial and the temporal as an index. So we basically, for example, like in our database, we aggregate data, for example, like tax dollars, like usage of electricities, for example, and all those data can be tagged with the spatial and the temporal, can be indexed with spatial and the temporal. It's not actually cube. It's actually spatial temporal as attribution. So once you have tons of attributions, then you'll be able to plug those attributions into the AI engine, the deep learning engine, for doing all kinds of analysis. So that solves the problem of the conventional database, the way we're organizing the data either in the grids or in the cubes. And so now we're actually being able to do it in different approach, in a different approach. So this become more effective in dealing with the complex data, or the data with a lot of uncertainties. And in fact, in the world, it's very difficult to collect a full picture of the data. So the data you're dealing with always with a lot of uncertainties. And we basically let the AI engine to lead dealing with those uncertainties.
Interesting.
Yeah,
so,
I just if I may just add 2 points. The third, adding to Vincent comment one, the third is that the spatial temporal index, in fact, that's the key for all the research that we have been conducted. We didn't change the original data structure, but we do add the spatial temporal index to facilitate the speedy processing of the data sets, and also being able to put them into the same framework. As Vincent mentioned, we have been treat spatial and temporal separately in the past, but the integral of them, taking them almost the same importance is critical, and the spatial temporal index is the key to link them together. And if we are looking at new data structure, a spatial temporal index, probably that's the one we have been focusing in the past few years. Another part is that in the any domain science, in the past, we have been really focusing on the principles of that science and what are the knowledge we have. We can equationize that and utilize that to do prediction and to build models. But with the big spatial temporal data sets coming online, the AI, or if we just let the machine learn what is the principles over there, it may be something that we don't know yet. For example, we have some research on what kind of factors of the geophysical side could intensify the tropical cyclones. That's basically trying to find out what are the factors will produce hurricanes. There's no good scientific understanding of that yet. But with machine learning, we were able to find the principal components for that. But how that can be opened, uncovered in terms of find out the principles, that's a lot of research, interpretive AI or machine learning. I just want to add those 2 points.
Well, very good. I think that from your responses, I gather that spatial indexing and temporal indexing are critical for knowledge graph and for spatial temporal big data analytics. But if we just index like a timestamp, or maybe let long location, or maybe the index for the polygons, how do we consider a higher level concept like phases? Because I look at Vincent's graph, there is a life. If we have life, we have cycles, we have different phases in life. And we look at the hurricanes, we have initiation stage, we have mature stage, and we have a stage that in the end of the process. But those are more relative for individual events or individual process rather than a absolute timestamp. So in that case, are we limited ourselves to only look at index-based knowledge, or can we, based on the index, to looking at a higher level spatial temporal concept like phases, life cycles, or like different stages in the process?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's just about the lifespan, as you mentioned about it. In terms of like a life cycle, you still have a temporal, the index associated with it. And it's a matter of the month, time, or years, like a hurricane or earthquakes, and the the time span could be longer. But again, that still can be indexed with temporal. So anything, I think, is always spatial temporal knowledge. If you're looking at the 3 dimensions, anything can be indexed with the spatial temporal and the knowledge that on the other axis. And so it still can be modeled, including like a life cycle you talked about, and the lifestyle you mentioned about it as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, May, in fact, yourself is an expert on the question you asked. Yeah, the spatial temporal index, I would not say it's kind of limiting us from thinking about the events. It's really provide a device or tool that could help us leverage the computing infrastructure to reason and learn the data sets we have that could help us manage, for example, the events, the objects, and when we have those active objects or events. I think it really opens us in a lot of ways, for example, to collaborate with other domains to develop new and data structures that may be needed in order to facilitate the collaboration with other domains. For example, with health, with medical, or with natural disaster, and with state management.
Very good. And an audience, that if you want to ask questions, please go ahead. And I don't mean to occupy the stage. I just taking the opportunity to ask two very frontline researchers on my selfishly my question here. So if nobody have a question, I'm going to ask my second question is about spatial temporal resolution. So I think both Vincent and Phil, you give example of COVID, but Vincent's case, he look at the community level prediction to look at different risk at the community level. Even though I do not know in China what is the spatial resolution of a community, but I suspect it's a much finer than a city. But then Phil also gave us an example of COVID, but it's more at the state level. But spatial temporal analysis are very much tied to the resolution we have. And can you comment on, like in the COVID example, how the individual level data versus community data versus administrative level data might have influence on how we build a knowledge graph, or how we might have limited our ability for spatial temporal modeling?
All right, and a few actually are being also addressed at the level of even the school level. And a few you want to talk about first?
Yeah, sure, I can. In fact, May gets to a central part of the spatial temporal studies. That is basically the scope, the geographic scope, and the scale, what kind of scale we're talking about. If we're dealing with problems at the global level, for example, we look at the impact of the COVID on the air quality global level, then we probably do not need the person level kind of resolution or go to that kind of detailed. But if we look at the campus reopening, we do need to track the every people's movement. In this case, we do not have that kind of data sets. You can imagine in the US, we do not have that. But we do the simulation of that by using random placing of that, and also putting the policies, for example, where do we have classes, in-person classes and events, and what time do we have people go back to their dormitory, and what time they may go to cafeteria. So that kind of information is utilized, and that resolution, as you can imagine, it's very fine scale on a meter level of resolution. And scale is obviously the scope of the campus. And the state one that you mentioned, in fact, we would love to go beyond that, for example, go to the county level. But unfortunately, in the United States, the policy implementation, it's quite different. The only policy data sets we can't get to is the state level. And there are some county level data sets, but that's not complete. So the scientific results probably will not be very good. That's why we didn't go down to the county level. So that's the situation of the data sets availability defines what we can't do in terms of the geographic scope and the scale, and also the resolution we can't get to.
Yeah, that's always been. I think that's it's not academic question. It's probably more practical. And in terms of COVID-19 cases, I think that's been a very interesting case that the spatial temporal community gets being awarded, and I would say gets more populated by the larger community, and the people start to understand the spatial temporal the domain and understanding the importance of this technology. And we've been very lucky at the time being selected by the Chinese CDC to help them to build a system for risk analysis and risk prediction for COVID-19. In China, there's about 800,000 communities, and the Chinese actually, the way the government is by the community, and so there are about 800,000 communities and the people situated in the community, and the central government needs to provide policy to at the time to prevent the COVID-19. So we do prediction of all this community level. At the time, of course, we've been able to utilize the data very much the fine level, the data coming from of course coming from the government and allowing us to do the analysis at the time. And certainly this is a very very effective approach, and the people start to realize that the importance of the mobility data, importance of mobility data. Now it's also come to another question about privacy, of course, and once you get in that kind of final level, the fine level of the human mobility, and privacy always gets concerned, and this is also the two sides of the coin, and the people started building a lot of different privacy tools, privacy computing, and I believe there's a lot of research working on those privacy computing tools to deal with those the spatial temporal data, especially the human mobility data. And so this is still being very, I think, the debating point, and where the data can be very useful, effective for a lot of applications in terms of business and also for the governance. On the other hand, you also can see the downside of the privacy because of the mobility data. I believe this problem can also be addressed by the future privacy technology, and which is coming on the horizon, and many different tools. And the technology still is pretty mature, I would say. The problem is a computational cost, and the return of investment as well, and there's too much burden on dealing with all this data that are going to prevent a lot of the business applications as well. So I think you talk about the resolution. I think always the higher the better, but the issue would be the privacy, and this has not been addressed by the U.S. and Facebook has been on the I think they've been on the court for several times, and continue be arguing at the arguing, and still be in discussion. But just a few weeks ago, I think just 2 weeks ago, the China released first the privacy law. Is very rigorous, and so we don't know yet how that will impact the industry and academic as well, because the Chinese privacy law is way much rigorous than the Europe and then the United States.
Wow.
Way much rigorous than the GDPR, which is European law, and so this is going to be affect a lot of industry and the Chinese the governance as well. And of course, many of you have heard about the DD story and many other stories as well. So this is quite interesting to see how this the granularity of the data that can be utilized or used in our work.
Yeah, I think that's going to get more and more challenge for spatial temporal analysis, just because we don't have access to the data. Okay, well, last call for questions, everybody. All right, yes, people are shy. Well, thank you both for the really exciting talk, and I'm going to review the videos again, and there's just so much there and so much to learn from you guys. what I will do next is I'm going to look at the recording and do some editing to remove some noises, and I will post the videos on YouTube channel, and I will email you on all the audience and people who register the webinar when the YouTube video is ready. Well, thank you very much. I hope that we can be in touch and then continue discussion on spatial temporal GI science.
Well,
Okay,
thank you, May.
Thank you, May. Thank you so much for organizing this webinar, and also thank you all the work that have been contributing to this society. Yeah. Thank you, May. And
thank you.
Thank you, May and Vincent. Yeah, we know that Vincent is extremely busy over there.
Yes,
really
yes.
And wishes to have him to spend the time with us this morning.
Yes,
thank you.
Much appreciated.
And, very delighted.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.